The ransom rises to €1,000,000 and Ewelina will be raped, and they will get a recording of all of it. Hello, welcome to another episode of Criminal Patrol. Today, probably one of the most mysterious kidnappings in the history of Poland. Ewelina, it seemed, had everything ahead of her. A 21-year-old girl, attractive, 1.74 meters tall, long blonde hair, smart. And on top of that, her father was basically fabulously rich. He was the owner of one of the largest meat companies. In Poland, Józef Baudiga, actually Ewelina's father, was on the list of the richest Poles in 2020. His fortune was estimated at 670 million zlotys, so it seemed that Ewelina had her whole life ahead of her. A life that would basically be free of such mundane troubles, but it seems that unfortunately both the money and the fortune have also brought trouble to Ewelina. I invite you to watch the next episode. It seems that despite all of this, despite all that huge amount of money, Ewelina somehow didn't let it go to her head. She remained a normal girl. She didn't really show off with that money, but of course everyone who wanted to know knew that her father was rich. And on a daily basis, she also drove a sporty BMW. She dressed nicely. Those were designer clothes, so they were a kind of indicator that she was doing well. She studied at the Higher School of Management in Warsaw. Her parents rented an apartment for her there. She lived together with her sister Dominika. On May 30th, almost 20 years ago, in 2005, she went to the university. She leaves the university. It's around 6 post-meridium. She's hurrying to her apartment because her mother came to visit her that day. In fact, she spent the whole day with her mother. First, they went shopping at the mall, then at home they cooked something, ate, and she was in a hurry to meet her mother. Even as she was leaving the university, she sent her a text message. "Mom, I'll be around 7 o'clock. That's your..." She had her BMW sports car parked in the Zepta parking lot on Domaniewska Street. She was in a hurry there too. She passed by that day. She was wearing white pants and a turquoise blouse. She was walking to the parking lot to get into her car. Well, while walking through the parking lot and getting into her car, she had to pass by a white transit van that was parked there, right next to her BMW. She had to squeeze through. There was simply no other way for her to get into the car. She walked past that white transit. It had license plates from somewhere in the Gostynin district, WGS. She walks by, and then a tall man gets out of that transit. Ewelina tries to open the door. The man quickly approaches her, grabs her by the neck and pulls her into the van. Someone had opened the door earlier and there was another man sitting behind the wheel. It looks like there must have been at least 3 kidnappers. One who overpowered her, another who opened the door, and a third who was sitting behind the wheel. The car drove off, but it also looks like there were even more kidnappers because another car followed right behind them. One that was probably acting as backup for those who kidnapped her. The car drove off. Ewelina didn't come home that day. Of course, they started looking for her, but her parents quickly realized that something must have happened. The police were notified. The search began. It turned out that there was surveillance nearby and there was a recording. This is a camera that was on the bank, and this recording showed that this is indeed what the kidnapping looked like. There was almost a recording. It was poor quality, but it confirmed that we were dealing with a classic kidnapping here. There was a license plate number. It was known what kind of van it was, what type. Except that the car was set on fire about 2 hours after the kidnapping on Stoczniokov Street, not far from the Midzashinsky embankment. That's where people saw the car burning. They even ran to put it out. Practically the whole car burned down, all traces were erased. And it also seemed that there really had to be at least a few of those kidnappers. They split up. Some took Ewelina somewhere, others set the car on fire, and that's roughly how it looked. So there was practically very little at the beginning, although it was assumed there was no other way. Ewelina was kidnapped for ransom. It was clear from this that it was a well-prepared kidnapping. Actually, the year 2005, according to statistics, but I also remember it very well. Those were the years when there was a real peak of kidnappings. There were the most of them back then. Usually kidnappers targeted either wealthy people's children or entrepreneurs themselves. As you remember, we made 2 episodes about kidnappings. Among others, there was also the kidnapping of a businessman, a wealthy man, Zbigniew Przewrotki. The man did not survive the kidnapping. He probably suffocated in the box they put him in. Actually, this series of kidnappings started in Poland around 2001 and lasted until 2007. The year 2001 was, of course, the kidnapping of Krzysztof Olejnik, also a well-known kidnapping. And also, by the way, his father worked in the meat industry, so to speak. So there were really a lot of these kidnappings. And it was assumed that this was a kidnapping for ransom. For several days, nothing happened. From May 30, the first phone call was on June 1, 2005. It was around 7:10 post-meridium. Someone called Mrs. Barbara's phone number. That's Ewelina's mother. Mrs. Barbara gave her husband the phone. Some man, an unfamiliar voice, said to him, "Joseph, don't hang up, I'll tell you something in a moment." And then it was a recording of Ewelina, most likely a previously prepared recording, where Ewelina, with a crying, sobbing voice, says, "Do everything you can so they don't kill me." Łukasz got a similar phone call. Łukasz is Ewelina's boyfriend. In that recording, the girl also asks him to do whatever the kidnappers want so that she could save her life. Actually, there are very few conversations with the kidnappers. After that, they communicate only through text messages. They write these messages stating that they want €500,000 for the release of their daughter. They also write that they are not rapists, that after the family pays the money, Ewelina will simply return home safe and sound. I also think that these text messages were meant to somehow paralyze the family's actions. As for notifying the police, or rather, since the police already knew, it was more about not cooperating closely with the police. That's actually a separate element in this case as well. There was probably a lack of trust from the family's side. I think the lack of trust was mutual. The police officers also realized that the family wasn't cooperating and wasn't telling them everything. Of course, the whole investigation had to suffer because of that. And that was also terrible in this case. Again, for a few days, the kidnappers remained silent. They made contact again on June 7th. They set a date for the ransom handover. The handover of that €500,000 will take place on June 10th. They call that day, which is June 10th, around 11 p.m. They asked Mr. Joseph if he is ready. Well, he said yes. He was supposed to pack the money into several plastic bags and take his son with him. But his son had a broken leg at the time, so he told the kidnappers that his son wouldn't go with him, but Łukasz, Ewelina's boyfriend, would. That's what happened. They got into the car, and then the whole time they kept getting instructions from the kidnappers on how to drive. First, they were told to drive towards Łomża, then towards Wyszków, and then those decisions kept changing quickly. Then they were told to go to the main Polskie Koleje Państwowe train station. Then they were told to go near the Marriott Hotel, and there already by the Marriott Hotel, Joseph received instructions to transfer to a taxi and go near the Ibis Hotel by the Polonia Stadium. Of course, all of this was meant to check whether Joseph was cooperating with the police or if the police were watching them. And there was a moment when Joseph got into the taxi that at some point they wrote that something was happening. They realized that they got a reply to the text message, and Joseph was getting into the taxi, so he couldn't have sent that reply. So they asked what was going on, who was sending the text messages. Then both Joseph and Łukasz said that it was Łukasz who was writing, because Mr. Joseph, first of all, was shaken up and not very good with the phone. He also doesn't have his glasses. That's why Łukasz is the one sending the text messages. I think that scared them. They somehow felt that something might be wrong. That the police, even though they had warned them, were still involved in the case, and at some point they said, let's just give it up. Well, Joseph is obviously devastated, and he's trying to get his daughter back at any cost. He's somehow pleaded, of course, through those text messages to let them continue the transaction. Then the kidnappers said they should actually go to that Ibis hotel, but Joseph was supposed to go inside into the hotel. And Łukasz was supposed to get into the taxi and then go to the place they would indicate. Then for almost an hour, Łukasz was driving around the whole city. They kept changing the location, first here, then there. Finally, after about an hour, they wrote that since the police are involved in this case, the ransom goes up to €1,000,000 and Ewelina will be draped. And they will get a recording of all of this. And indeed, it ended with nothing. Joseph and Łukasz returned home devastated. The kidnappers did not collect the ransom, and Ewelina's fate was still unknown. At that time, Ewelina's family really wasn't cooperating with the police. The police aren't involved in any of this, so it looks like the kidnappers just panicked. Or maybe they somehow decided it wasn't worth the risk. And that's why they didn't collect the ransom. Again, for quite a few days if you look at it. It was almost a month after the kidnapping. They contacted us again somewhere near the end of June, and they set the date for handing over the ransom for June 28th. Ewelina was kidnapped on May 30th. June 28th is almost a month. So for about a month, the girl is being held captive the whole time. They set the date for June 28th, and this time, the one who has to deliver the ransom is Łukasz, Ewelina's boyfriend. He also has to exchange zlotys for euros at the currency exchange first. In the end, the family, since they didn't have that kind of cash, started selling various things. They managed to get 576,500 euros. Well, that's the amount they ended up with. 576,500 euros. That's how much they collected. As you remember, the kidnappers wanted 1 million euros. And so Lukasz, with that amount that very night, because it was already night, he set out to deliver the ransom to the kidnappers. History repeats itself. He gets into the car. Again, he drives to different places. And that's somewhere along the Vilnius route. And that's to the gas station on Radzyminska Street. Then they tell him to go near the Grota Roekiego Bridge. He waits there for a long time. They still don't contact him. It's already midnight. Then they told him to go near those acoustic screens that are there. Take the shopping bags with money with him. In fact, he's standing on one side of such a screen, and he sees that on the other side, a tall man appears. That man told him to throw the shopping bags over the acoustic screens. Lukasz actually does it. He throws those shopping bags over. That man bends down, takes the shopping bags and runs away. Lukasz gets into the car and goes back home. Ewelina doesn't return home. Still, I would say these suspicions around the investigation, even around the police officers, or especially one of the police officers who is involved in this, are focusing. That police officer is being investigated by Internal Affairs, but nothing comes of it. But as I mentioned a bit earlier, the atmosphere of this investigation is not good. It doesn't help with actually analyzing all the evidence. That everything is being done in a way to make Ewelina be released, as that was the key issue here. The kidnappers remain silent even though they took the ransom. The next phone call is not until July 14. It's already almost a month and a half since the kidnapping. They play Ewelina's recording again. In this recording, Ewelina says, "Dad, Mom, I want to reassure you a little. Nothing bad happened to me. I know that I was kidnapped for 1 million euros. That amount must be paid before I can be released. They'll let me go." Of course, it was a kind of pre-recorded message. Also a bit, I would say, surprising. Because, first of all, that recording said that Ewelina knows that the amount of 576,000 euros was paid. And secondly, there was a second part, I would say, strange, because the parents, the father, was supposed to prepare answers to a few questions like that. Like who handed over or delivered the ransom, where it happened, at what time, whether the ransom was handed over by the father, Lukasz, or by the police. And the answer to these questions was supposed to be prepared. Ewelina said in this recording that she would call again after some time, and then it will happen. She wanted to get answers to these questions. There's one more thing in this recording. Ewelina says something like this at the end. She speaks to her dad. "Dad, trust only Mom, except no one except her, and you can know anything more. It will be better for you and for me." And again, for a few days, nothing is happening. The kidnappers make contact again on July 19th, around 1:30 post-meridium, but this time Lukasz answers the phone. It seems like it's a prepared recording because Ewelina speaks to him. "Dad, in this recording, Lukasz says that they aren't able to collect the remaining amount, that they can sell the cars, but all of this will take time." At the end, Ewelina also asks for answers to the questions she asked earlier. So those are the questions about the ransom handover itself, the time, the date, who did it, and so on. Lukasz talks about all of that, and at the end, again, it's a kind of reassurance. "Dad, trust only yourself and Mom." He also sends his regards and assures them that he loves them, loves his sister, loves his brother. He mentions only them. And at this moment, the recording ends. We know about one more recording. This is a recording from August 4th, 2005. So you see, that's quite a lot of time. That's all of June, July, and August. On August 4th, the kidnappers contact the family once again. As it's described, this is a kind of survival recording from Ewelina. Well, we can only guess that it was something Ewelina talked about and it was happening at that time. So the conclusion is that since she talked about it, she was alive at that time. And the last recording is from that time, August 4th, 2005. After that, the kidnappers never contacted us again. And Ewelina never came back home. Of course, they tried to solve this case. They tried to investigate during those years. However, they were never able to find any evidence. Although there were various kinds of clues, there were various kinds of, I would say, specific pieces of information. They were never translated into any specific charges at that time. Of course, there were a lot of grievances. I think those were grievances, and there were suggestions to the police that some other people were involved in this case. And the fact that not all the police officers in this case were honest, there were also suggestions about that, as well as about Ewelina's boyfriend. As is often the case in these kinds of matters, there were no specifics, but more of these kinds of suggestions, assumptions, or suspicions. There were cases going on about other kidnappings. As I told you, there were a lot of these kidnappings. At that time, the police later came across a gang, the so-called finger-cutting gang. It's one of the most brutal gangs in the history of Poland. The finger-cutting gang, also known as the Father's Gang, because that was the nickname of the group's leader. Here, the suspicions began to focus on them, and indeed the police picked up a lead that it was the finger-cutting gang. The gang that emerged after the breakup of the Wołomin and Mokotów groups, that it was this group behind Ewelina's kidnapping. It is suspected that at the head of this group between 2003 and 2005, the finger-cutting gang kidnapped around 20 people. They made several million zlotys from this. The leaders of this gang were Grzegorz K., nicknamed Father, and Tomasz R., nicknamed Pikus. And they were sort of the leaders of this group. Also, the testimonies that appeared, there was a crown witness in this case, and other people testified as well. These testimonies made it possible to charge Grzegorz K. and Tomasz R. with kidnapping Ewelina, holding her prisoner in such extreme, exhausting conditions. But for that kidnapping, they got 15 years. In this case, which took place much later because it was between 2017 and 2022, so you see it was rather recently. This proceeding took place from January 2017 to June 2022. Other threads also appeared in this case, including the thread of Wojtas, who also planned to kidnap Ewelina. It was on his orders that two men, Janusz M. and Andrzej K., followed Ewelina back in 2004. Wojtas himself was not charged with kidnapping. He was charged with other types of crimes altogether and also received a life sentence. But it's not out of the question that either he planned Ewelina's kidnapping earlier or he kind of sold the idea to Pikus and then they carried it out together. A lot of threads are starting to emerge regarding the kidnapping during that time. As I said, Ewelina was never found. She was never declared dead. She would be 42 years old today if she were alive. Before the trial even took place, the trial of the finger-cutting gang, something else happened. Namely, a huge fire at the company, Ewelina's father's company, in 2009. Basically a fire that covered 5 hectares of that area. And the company, which is located in Wize, near Ostrołęka, huge losses, 260 million zlotys. Of course, the question was whether this fire was an accident, as it was later determined to be a short circuit in the electrical installation, or if someone wanted to take over the family business. And the kidnapping of Ewelina was just one of the elements. That's still a mystery in this investigation. Maybe that will also be explained. We know that the company recovered, it was insured, so everything got back on track. New equipment was purchased, the company is doing well. Besides, I saw the company's commercial on television this week, so you can see that everything is fine in that regard. But of course, there's still the question of whether this fire was also connected to Ewelina's kidnapping. As for the circumstances of the kidnapping itself, how it all looked, it basically seems that we have a clear picture of everything. The initiator was actually Pikus, who told Grzegorz K., the leader of the finger-cutting gang, that he had his eye on 2 rich girls, that the girls lived in Warsaw, that their father was a wealthy businessman, and he said he wanted to kidnap them. He even asked his father for advice on how he could safely collect the ransom. And at the beginning of June 2005, he told Grzegorz K. that he had kidnapped one of those girls, that she was being held at the property of one of his accomplices. And here it's already about the negotiations themselves, or participation in this transaction. Grzegorz K. took over. He was the one who talked to the family. He also had a special cell phone where he had, or rather a radio tuned more to police frequencies. When Pikus was instructing Ewelina and Łukasz's father where to go, he set the device to police frequencies and listened to see if the police officers were exchanging any details among themselves or coordinating anything. Well, all of this was, of course, planned in advance with the prior reconnaissance and observation of the girls. As you remember, these were really detailed things and everything was planned out precisely. In the end, Pikus told Grzegorz K. that even though they had collected the ransom, he would still keep pressuring the family to pay the full amount of the ransom. He gave Grzegorz K. quite a few explanations like that, talking about the details, about how they watched Łukasz through binoculars when he was transferring the ransom money. He also talked about a moment when they wanted to put pressure on the family to scare them. They cut Ewelina's hair, put it in a plastic bag, and then left that bag near a road sign that said Wyszków. They called or wrote to the father then, telling him that he had a bag to pick up. Of course, he was very scared at that moment. Grzegorz K. gave these explanations because at some point he had a falling out with Pikus, with Tomaszar. Both of them were in conflict. Grzegorz K. suspected him that someone from his circle, meaning Pikus's, snitched, which is why the police raided his property and conducted a search. A conflict arose between them, and that's probably why he filed all those statements incriminating him. Pikus himself never admitted to anything. In the case, as I mentioned earlier, there was a Crown witness and there were other witnesses. There was even someone who said that Ewelina was killed, but when it happened and who did it was never explained. As you can see, both suspects only have charges in this situation of kidnapping and holding Ewelina. Who possibly murdered her, we still don't know. In fact, this case is still not over even after 20 years because an appeal hearing was scheduled for October last year, 2024. At that time, it was not possible to assemble the panel of judges, so the hearing did not take place. So you see, from a formal point of view, this case is still ongoing. Perhaps during this appeal we will learn some other interesting details, because it doesn't concern only the kidnapping of Ewelina, but also other crimes from that period. A period, as I have said several times already, that was extremely difficult, where very cruel crimes dominated. As you can see, kidnappings, murders, well, that was very common back then. And that's all for today's episode. Of course, I invite you to watch our next episodes. Of course, subscribe to our channel, and as always, take care.